My wife Mandy drove just over 8,000 miles a year, mostly on short business trips to clients. Our detached villa in Surrey was not that far from the hellish M25 freeway, which tightens the loop around London. It was a great place to live, but even a short commute can take a long time on the M25. To cope with the traffic on the M25, Mandy preferred to snack and drink soft drinks while listening to bubblegum radio. It helped that she adored her bright orange VW Beetle Cabriolet. It was a brand new version of Volkswagen with a powerful 2-liter engine, state-of-the-art audio system, black soft top, and black leather seats. Many agree that it's a great little car, but that didn't stop it from cluttering up the interior with candy bar wrappers, empty drink cartons, and other nonsense. It amused me that she drove a car with a top speed of over 120 miles per hour, but most of the time it was either stationary or crawling along some of the busiest roads in the UK. Mandy's first car was an old VW Beetle when she was at university, and she told me she has fond memories of that car. This was before she met me, and in those days she lived at home with her parents. I didn't ask her, but it's likely that her fond memories involve spending time with young people in tight spaces. When VW reinvented the Beetle a few years ago, she kept talking about how much she would love to have such a car. I took the hint and bought a top-of-the-line convertible, which she wanted for her 50th birthday. I also bought a personalized registration that she had to have. It was an absurd amount of money for a license plate with her initials and the letters Bug. The car became known as the Wee Bug, but despite her affection for the car, Mandy couldn't be bothered to check the Wee Bug's tire pressure and fluid levels, so that was something I did regularly. Some people don't mind driving around in a car full of junk, but I can't stand a dirty car, so I also cleaned up empty cardboard boxes, paper cups, food wrappers, and other trash. It was no big deal, and I never mentioned it. Mandy never thanked me, probably because she didn't even notice, but I didn't mind because I always found enough change among the trash to buy a couple of beers at our local pub at the end of the day. It's not surprising that Mandy was a bit careless with her change, considering we both earned well and lived in affluence. Mandy is a business consultant. She helps a wide variety of companies develop strategies to develop and grow their businesses. I'm a freelance project manager specializing in change management projects. Everyone calls me Terry. My real name is Dave, not Terrence, but even my wife calls me Terry. Why? It's short for Terminator. Change projects almost always result in some poor bastards getting fired, and it's my job to do the dirty work. Mandy and I met at university when we were both studying business administration. We became such good friends that before we were even married, we started our own limited company, Alpha Business Consultants Limited. Although we were young and relatively naive, we received some useful advice and financial support from my father, a respected commercial lawyer. Sadly, my father is no longer with us. He died of illness a couple of years ago. When we set up the company, he agreed to become a director, and it was his active involvement that gave us the seriousness we needed to sit down with potential clients. In return, we gave my father some shares in the company, and he was always ready and willing to use his skills, knowledge, and experience. In the early years, Mandy and I worked hard to generate business for ABC, building up a base of clients who required strategic business planning advice. After a while, however, we realized that our skill sets were quite different. Mandy is skilled at helping companies plan for the future, while my forte is operational problem-solving in the here and now. Her specialty is planning what people want to see happen, while mine is solving problems when things go according to plan. Both Mandy and Dad felt that ABC should be clearly identified as a company focused on strategy rather than implementation, so we agreed that I would trade separately as an independent consultant specializing in organizational change project management. Mandy continued to work for ABC as a sole employee. Our twin daughters, Linda and Lucy, left home a couple of years ago and they are now both at university. But when they were small, I set up a room on the first floor of our house as the ABC office and hung a sign on the door saying "Office." Mandy or I could go in there and work undisturbed. Gradually, it became Mandy's office because I work mostly on-site at a client's facility and she works off-site from home. She has about 50 key clients, and she charges for her consulting services as those clients need her advice. Unlike Mandy, I rarely had a full-time business, although I received referrals and worked regularly as an associate for a well-known consulting firm. I usually had only one client at any given time, and I would work with them for weeks or months, managing a major change project such as an office move or organizational restructuring. When I finished a project, I would usually take a break for a few days or even weeks before a new assignment came along. Not knowing what comes next can be frustrating for many, but I got used to it and enjoyed the occasional break, catching up on reading and improving my cooking skills. It also gave me time to do most of the chores around the house that didn't require professionals. I also cleaned the aquarium in Mandy's study on a regular basis. She had read somewhere that a large aquarium with lots of brightly colored tropical fish helped the thought process, so she just had to have it. She liked the aquarium, but she couldn't be bothered to maintain and keep it. She probably thought pH was just two random letters, so I ended up looking after the well-being of the fish. I never complained about being alone when Mandy went away on short business trips, and she didn't complain if I was gone for a week working at a facility in another part of the country. In fact, I think our loving relationship only benefited from these infrequent absences, especially after our two daughters left home and we were left alone. I hoped that by becoming empty nesters, we could revitalize our social lives by going out more often, maybe even taking a romantic weekend getaway to Paris or Rome. As the saying goes, men plan and the gods laugh. That all changed when Mandy came home one day with Wee Doug. Wee Doug is a Shih Tzu, also known as a Chinese lion dog. Every time I see him, I'm reminded of an anecdote about a guy who went to a zoo where there was only one animal, a dog. It was a Shih Tzu. I was a little annoyed that Mandy got a dog without consulting me. Wee Doug was friendly enough, but I knew right away that I would eventually have to take him for walks and look after him when Mandy wasn't around, and possibly when she was. When she got him, he was still a puppy and needed to be house-trained, so guess who got that treat? We didn't just start calling him Wee Doug because he was little. For a while, he peed everywhere and anywhere. Mandy adored Wee Doug. He was literally her lapdog, sitting on her lap every chance he got. She would pet him as he lay next to her on the couch while she watched TV. He sat in the chair next to her when we sat at the dinner table, and in the morning, he could invariably be found lying on our bed. I tried my best to talk Mandy out of giving Wee Doug complete freedom of movement around the house, but my entreaties went unheeded. To keep our love life from going off the rails, I had to lock the bedroom door if I wanted my wife alone in the bedroom. And even then, I had to remember to unlock the door and open it afterward. Otherwise, Wee Doug would start whining at me from behind the door and Mandy inside the bedroom. Now you're probably thinking I'm an irritable bastard and probably suffering from OCD while sifting through garbage in my wife's car, but I'm not. I'm not too bothered by the little things, so when I needed to clean up the wee bug, I'd open the car door, shovel out all the trash, and dump it in a plastic bag on the edge of the doorframe. Any little thing ended up on the floor under the trash, so no sorting was necessary. This Sunday afternoon was no different until a piece of paper fell on the floor next to the plastic bag. I noticed it was a credit card receipt from the Ainsley House Hotel, a huge country house hotel about 20 miles from our house. Like many other large country hotels, it has a restaurant with a solid reputation, but the main income comes from the spa and conference center, where seminars, wedding receptions, business dinners, and other events are held. There were no details about the purchase, but the amount was what one would pay for lunch or dinner for 2 or 3 people. I assumed Mandy was treating customers, so I figured it was best not to throw the receipt away in case she needed it, and slipped it into my wallet to give to her later. I put all the snack wrappers and other trash in a plastic bag, tied it up, and threw it in the trash. Then drove Wee Bug to the local garage to fill her up and check her tires and fluid levels. Mandy was leaving the next day on a business trip up north and wouldn't be back until a few days later. I, on the other hand, had a lot of free time. I had hoped to take her to lunch at the Fox and Hounds pub, but she said she was too busy preparing for the trip. I was disappointed by this because Sunday has always been a family day for us. Our daughters continued that tradition by calling each other on Sundays, So I wasn't surprised when, upon returning from the garage, I found Mandy with her feet up in the living room, clearly engaged in a long phone conversation with Lucy. Listening to Mandy finish the conversation, I realized that Lucy was having another crisis in her personal life. Linda is the calm and poised daughter, whereas Lucy is the drama queen. When their sleepovers with the boys got serious, I tried to stay calm, but also show that I cared about what was going on in their lives. They know we're both there for them if they need help or advice, but their mom is usually first on the list if they want to gossip or scandalize. As I recall Mandy telling Lucy to get over it, to get back in the water, that there are still plenty of fish in the sea and that she should try before she buys. I didn't know what had happened, and I didn't know what advice I would have given Lucy. I think the Latin motto, festina lente, is generally a good approach to problem solving. Take things slowly. Give yourself time to think, and then decide what to do. Whatever was going on, Lucy had to decide for herself what she wanted to do next. I wasn't going to do my part and confuse her further, so I just asked Mandy to say hi for me and went into the kitchen to prepare Sunday lunch. Roast beef and Yorkshire puddings with roast potatoes was our standard Sunday meal, and I found therapeutic pleasure in cooking it all together, especially when I had a decent bottle of claret to go with it. Mandy wasn't much for conversation over dinner, although she did bring me up to speed by telling me about her phone conversations with Linda and Lucy. Linda was in an ongoing relationship with a nice guy and was going through a blossoming period in her studies, getting good grades on her latest assignments. Lucy was not doing so well, and her boyfriend dumped her after he noticed her making out with another guy. I offered the opinion that Lucy's boyfriend could accept her making out with another guy if he was given time to change his mind. But I doubted that any way back could be found if Lucy decided to try possible substitutes in the meantime. Mandy had a very different viewpoint and seemed to think that Lucy should just forget about the relationship and look for fun elsewhere. After dinner, I went for an evening promenade with Wee Doug, making sure the small black plastic bag containing his belongings was tightly closed and tossed into the trash can outside. I just don't understand the idiots who hang these little bags on bushes and trees. Do they seriously think the dog shit fairies are going to fly in the middle of the night and pick up their leftovers? Later, I sat in the living room watching TV for a while Mandy went into her office with Wee Doug to finish preparing a presentation for a client. I loaded the dishwasher and went to bed, where I tossed and turned for a while before falling into a restless sleep. I vaguely sensed that Mandy had gone to bed much later, but when I woke up in the morning, she was already up. Instead of my beloved wife, I found myself face to face with Wee Doug, who was exhaling his stinky dog breath right in my face. There's nothing like morning Shih Tzu breath to get you out of bed in no time. I quickly got dressed and took Wee Doug out for his morning hygiene before joining Mandy in the kitchen. We're both not big fans of mornings, and Mandy always needed a couple cups of espresso to start the day. We chatted briefly about the weather as we waited for the rush hour traffic to finish its stop-start on the M25 freeway. Then she kissed me on the cheek, stroked Wee Doug affectionately, got into Wee Bug, and set off. It was only when she left that I remembered the receipt in my wallet and decided to leave it on the desk in her office. That's when I noticed that the payment on the receipt was timed at 10:18 a.m. It was most likely a payment for an overnight stay, but that didn't make sense. Perhaps she had some business event and didn't want to drive home. I could have asked her later, and there would probably have been some simple explanation, but I had some free time on my hands, so I decided to check my day planner to see where I was that day. It turned out that I hadn't been home that week, but I had noted in my diary that Mandy was due to go north for 3 nights. The receipt was issued the morning after she left, so it looked like she'd only had time to drive 20 miles before spending the night at the Ainsley House Hotel. If she was at a business event, I could easily drop her off and pick her up, and she wouldn't have to pay for an overnight stay. I sat in her office and looked at the receipt. I hadn't noticed anything unusual in her behavior. We still made love regularly, but I couldn't escape the thought that this could be proof that she was having an affair. I was shocked by this possibility, But more than anything, I was puzzled. I had absolutely no idea that she could be having a close relationship with anyone else, and I had no suspects. I also had a hard time understanding why she would want to book a hotel room when she could just take advantage of my regular absences and have fun at home. Of course, maybe she was doing both, or maybe there was some completely innocent reason why she was staying at the Ainsley House Hotel that evening. As I sat there trying to figure out what was going on, it dawned on me that she could be doing the same thing on her current business trip. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed the phone number on the receipt, hoping my suspicions were unfounded. I asked the nice woman who picked up the phone if she could put me through to their guest, Mrs. Amanda Carmichael. She said she was sorry she couldn't do that. For a brief moment, I was relieved, but instead of saying there was no reservation for that name, she explained that Mrs. Carmichael hadn't checked in yet. Check-in is from 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was only 11:30 now. Would I like to leave a message? She asked. Of course I could leave a message something like this. Your husband called. He wants to know what the hell you're doing here. That would have been nice, but unlikely to give me the answers I needed, so I politely declined her offer. I made myself another cup of coffee and contemplated my next steps. Unlike the nitwits at the helm of our country, I wasn't going to waste my time chaffing, ducking the issue, or coming up with my own version of reality. Maybe going to the hotel and confronting Mandy wouldn't solve our problems, but at least I could take immediate action, whatever the consequences. Maybe there was a plausible and completely innocent explanation. On the other hand, maybe she had a bull and was putting the horns on me. I decided I would have to take the bull by the horns. I put Wee Doug in the garden, figuring I could clean up after him when I got back, then got in the car and headed for the Ainsley House Hotel. It was past noon when I got there, and I immediately spotted Wee Doug in the parking lot, so Mandy had probably already checked in. I parked across 4 rows and called Mandy on her cell phone. She answered almost immediately. Hey Terry, how are you doing? I just heard there was a serious accident on the freeway, and I wanted to see if you were okay. Traffic's a bit backed up, but I didn't know there'd been an accident. It's on the M25 highway, so maybe you managed to get past it before it happened. Oh yes, I'm just passing Watford. Thanks for checking. Okay, let me know when you get there safely. Okay, bye. After listening to this nonsense, I decided to walk around the hotel and see if I could surprise her. Maybe she's having lunch with her lover, and after lunch they'll go out for an afternoon of fun. If she's not to be seen in the public areas of the hotel, I'll call her room and ask if I can go up to her room for a chat. I entered the hotel and headed for the Brasserie restaurant. It wasn't crowded and Mandy was nowhere to be seen. I decided the lobby bar would be a good vantage point. I'd sit for a while and see if she and whoever she was dating showed up before calling her room. I still doubted there was even the slightest chance that she was there for some other reason, and just hadn't bothered to tell me what she was up to. As I crossed the lobby, I noticed a large bulletin board that listed the various function rooms and the day's activities. Monday seemed to be a quiet day. The only event that caught my eye was a private party in the spa and fitness center starting at 7 p.m. that evening. I wondered what kind of private party might be held at the spa or fitness center. Maybe it's people who want to take advantage of the services without being encumbered by clothes. I asked the front desk about the private party. The receptionist seemed a little flustered by my question, and then politely said she couldn't provide any information about the private party. In other words, it was none of my business. I settled down at the lobby bar and ordered a coffee. The waiter serving me was much more forthright when I asked him what the story was about the nudists at the spa. Yeah, I guess you could call them nudists, but that's not all, he told me. It's probably one of the worst-kept secrets around, but this private party is a regular event. Wow, that sounds fun, I said with false enthusiasm. Any idea how I can find out more? Easy. If you have access to the internet, just type the name of the club in there, she called it out. I sipped my coffee, pulled out my cell phone, and went online via the hotel's Wi-Fi. Finding a club online turned out to be easy. If you wanted to attend any of their events, you had to join the club and accept their terms and conditions, but the annual membership fee was only £20. The club's Mellow Monday Mix and Pick party, which cost £49 for single men, was held at 7 p.m. on the same day in the spa of a local hotel. The website specified how club members should be dressed, including the advice that masks were optional. By this time, I was pretty sure that Mellow Monday Mix and Pick was the reason Mandy checked into the hotel. It looked like she wanted to have some fun this evening, so I decided to try and catch her in the act. I didn't want to see anything, but I needed clear evidence to use in the divorce if this was what she was up to. My plan wouldn't work if she caught me sitting in the hotel lobby, so I finished my coffee and went outside to get in my car. I pulled out my cell phone, called the club, and spoke to another nice woman who processed my payment and explained that I would need to bring ID to be admitted to the event. She told me that my personal information would not be shared with any third parties, including other club members. The name of the club would not appear on any transaction records. The name of the supplier for any purchases will appear as SJB Services. I went home to do some homework to see if Doug was okay. I still wasn't quite sure I had bet on the right horse until I checked our finances online, including ABC's bank accounts. Unfortunately, my horse looked like a winner. Over the past year, SJB Services had received periodic payments, presumably for Mandy's membership and various events she had attended. I printed out the bank statements. Back at the hotel in the evening, I waited until 8 p.m. before heading to the spa. At a large table in the spa's reception area sat a middle-aged lady in a flowery dress. It turned out to be the same woman I had spoken to on the phone. She checked my ID and sold me a mask. I must have looked a little nervous, and she tried to calm me down. Just make your way to the gym. You're a little late, so you may have to wait to join, but I'm sure you'll have a good time. Our members are very sociable, and they will make you feel welcome. If you're in doubt about anything, ask, and you'll be sure to be corrected. I put on my mask and walked through the door, down the aisle, past the locker rooms and into the gym. There were about 70 or 80 people in the gym, and the organizers had tried to create a warm and welcoming atmosphere. The heating was on, and the lights were dimmed. There was some pleasant jazz playing through the sound system, loud enough to provide background music to set the mood, but not impede conversation. Just outside the gym door was a table with refreshments, but the action was elsewhere. Further into one of the rooms I found my wife, and how she was doing it. I wasn't going to speak or utter anything that would give away my presence, so there was no chance of her becoming aware of my presence, as there were still many people around. I concentrated on secretly recording what was happening on the video camera of my cell phone, which I slipped out of my jacket cuff into the palm of my right hand. I'd signed a confidentiality agreement to get in, but that wouldn't stop me from getting evidence. Mandy's face would be clearly visible, and I could blur the faces of third parties into the video later. Standing next to me was a middle-aged white man dressed in a black shirt and black chinos. He was happily giving some sort of commentary on the match. I have no idea if it was meant for anyone else, but it seemed like everyone had something to contribute. Part of my mind was screaming in fear, but I shut it down in a dark corner. The other part of my mind was clear and focused and working on getting evidence. The girl at the front desk of the spa was surprised that I was leaving so soon after coming in, but I told her I had forgotten something and would be back. To say I was upset is an understatement. I was trying to come to terms with Mandy having fun with a bunch of strangers. She was giving them something that was very dear to me. Our special relationship was completely devalued and, as a result, worthless. I was in shock, but as I left the hotel, I began to have a physical and mental reaction to what I had just seen and heard. Nausea and a feeling of emptiness engulfed my stomach, and I could taste the bile that had gathered in my mouth, almost like food poisoning. At the same time, I experienced an overpowering feeling of sadness, so deep that I had to sit in the car for a while before I could drive home. Gradually, my mind began to build a barrier around the resentment, sadness, and grief. It didn't make me feel any better, simply because I knew all about the process of managing change in adverse circumstances. I wasn't going to waste time in denial. She was having fun with other people. After all, I had seen it with my own eyes. Sure, I was angry, but I accepted the inevitability of change and had to respond to it, make adjustments, and control the change process as much as I could. Grief and anger would be my close companions for some time to come, but I decided that I would begin to act without delay. I wanted to get ahead of things, not get stuck in a rut trying to figure out what and why. By the time I got home, I had an idea of how I could begin to take action, control the inevitable changes, and get the results I wanted, not those forced upon me. I waited and saw if I would feel the same way in the morning. In the meantime, I took a little walk with wee Doug so he could do his business, and then tried to numb the heartache with a couple of mugs of Glenfarclas. Next chapter. I didn't sleep well and felt like shit the next morning, but wee Doug and I were going on a trip. I'd always thought of Cornwall as the headland of England. It's as far southwest as you can get and juts out into the open Atlantic Ocean. Now most of Cornwall is practically a retirement home for wealthy retirees from London who have bought up all the little cottages that were once the homes of Cornish fishermen. The hard-working fishermen have been replaced by the silver-haired and wrinkled Mr. and Mrs. Beege. Many of these elderly people have pet dogs to keep them company and give them an extra incentive to keep healthy by going out for a walk each day. I thought about taking wee Doug with me to Belgium, but he hadn't been fitted with an electronic chip and didn't have a pet passport, so that option fell away. Perhaps it was a good thing he didn't have a chip implant because he could have been tracked. In any case, Cornwall was further away from Surrey than Brussels. The drive to Newquay took over 5 hours, with a brief stop along the way so wee Doug could stretch his legs and dump the load I'd bagged and thrown away. The lovely woman at the animal shelter happily picked him up when I told her I had found him wandering the streets of Newquay without a collar or any other indication of who his owner might be. She immediately recognized wee Doug as a Shih Tzu, and I tried to tell her my zoo joke, but she didn't get it. She assured me that the dog would easily find a home, even if his owners could not be found, because he was just the kind of small dog that older people look for. For my part, I was glad wee Doug didn't whine when I left. He just looked a little puzzled. On the way out of Newquay, I decided to find a country pub for a late lunch. When I asked the man behind the cash register at the gas station where to dine, he told me, "You could do worse than White Horse." I must have stared at him in amazement for a few seconds until I realized what he meant. The White Horse Inn was nearby. Soon I was sitting at a table in a quiet corner of the beer garden all by myself, with a ploughman's lunch and half a pint of tasty ale. I checked my cell phone for messages and then called Jim Savage. Jim is a senior partner in a large consulting firm based in Surrey. Mandy and I have known Jim for a long time because he is a major competitor of the ABC. Jim is a pleasant enough character, but he is a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing when it comes to business matters. Shortly after Mandy and I founded ABC, Jim tried everything he could to neutralize us. He offered us well-paying jobs if we would close ABC and move in with him. There can be little doubt that Jim would have hired us, but would have gotten rid of us a little later when it suited him. We didn't take Jim up on his offer all those years ago, but we did meet him from time to time at various business events hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce. Jim was very interested in what I had to say. Despite the short notice, he agreed to meet with me the next day. By the time I got back to Surrey, it was early evening, and I decided to call Mandy and tell her about wee Doug. I was still feeling very angry, but at least I was able to take some action to take that anger away. I was confident that I could talk to her without telling her what was on my mind. Coincidentally, my cell phone rang before I could call her. "Hey, Mandy," I said. "I was just about to call you. I'm afraid I have some very bad news. Wee Doug somehow got out of the garden this afternoon. He ran out onto the main road and was hit by one of those damned juggernauts." "Oh my God!" she cried out in horror. "What happened? Is he okay?" "I'm sorry, Mandy. I'm afraid he's gone. I didn't see it myself, but a passerby came to get me. She said she saw a dog skip under our garden gate and run down the street, but she couldn't stop it. The truck driver didn't stop. Maybe he didn't realize he had hit a small dog. There was nothing I could do. I buried him in the backyard." On the other end of the wire, Mandy let out a prolonged sob and then mumbled something about her poor wee Doug. I couldn't blame wee Doug for Mandy's decision to have fun with other people. Besides, I had a much greater satisfaction in knowing that wee Doug was alive and well and living in Cornwall, while Mandy thought he was dead and buried. I expressed my condolences to Mandy and offered to make a small headstone on Doug's grave. This brought her to tears again, and we ended the conversation. She was clearly heartbroken, and there was no doubt that she would be crying for a long time that evening, mourning her loss. Next chapter. The next morning I went to the local butcher's shop and bought a rabbit, which I carefully butchered with a hammer and then buried, wrapped in an old towel in the garden. Just in case Mandy ever decided to dig up the corpse of her pet, I thought a smashed, decomposing dead rabbit might make a good stunt double for a smashed, decomposing dead Shih Tzu. I even put wee Doug's collar on the rabbit, but kept his ID tag as a keepsake for Mandy, so she would have a daily reminder of her loss. My meeting with Jim Savage went very well that day. After I explained what I needed, he said it was almost certain that his company would agree to the deal as I was proposing, and he would have their corporate lawyer draw up an agreement for me to review as soon as possible. On the way home, I stopped by one of the real estate agents in our area and chatted with them about how much they thought our house might be worth on the market. It sounded like a heck of a lot of money. Mandy and I discussed what we would do when we retired, and our plan of action included keeping the house and renting it out. We discussed it with our daughters, and they thought it was a good idea, as long as we didn't sell the house. Now I had a few changes to make to the plan. I didn't call Mandy that evening, even though she was probably waiting for me to find out how she was coping with the loss of wee Doug. I thought about it, but I wasn't going to be sympathetic. She would deal with it on her own and get home late the next day. If her words were to be believed, she was somewhere near Manchester, but who knows if that was really the case? Whatever she was up to and wherever she was, all I know is that I slept a little better that night, having gotten a little payback for the grief she caused me. Waking up early, I briefly wondered where wee Doug was, but then I remembered that he was no longer with us. I was relieved to realize that I would no longer have to feed and water him, take him out for walks, and bag his shit. That fleeting thought was immediately replaced by the return of the realization that I had much more serious shit to deal with. In England, divorce lawyers are called family lawyers. They specialize in family law, which as far as I can tell is mostly about divorce and death. There are many of them, and there is not much difference between them. I didn't want someone local, so I called and made an appointment with a family lawyer in Dorking. The name of the town suited my twisted sense of humor, plus it wasn't far away. I was given an appointment for the afternoon. With time to spare, I checked information about personalized registration plates on the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Office website, then visited a jewelry store and went grocery shopping before heading to Dorking. In between, I called a few business associates. When I got to the family law firm's office, my nerves were on edge. I never expected to be in this situation. The receptionist tried her best to calm me down and brought me a cup of coffee while I waited. The lawyer turned out to be another middle-aged woman who listened attentively to my tale of woe, but warned me to take my time. In my experience, attorneys are stingy people and rarely turn down potential clients, regardless of the circumstances of a particular case. I pointed out to the lawyer that the divorce petition could be withdrawn at a later stage. Of course, from my perspective, it was unlikely, and the attorney probably didn't care one way or the other, but she seemed satisfied that we had discussed the options and agreed to file the divorce petition on the grounds of Mandy's adultery. When I got home, I felt like peeing, so I went into Mandy's office and peed in her fish tank. I wasn't quite sure how all that pee would affect her tropical fish, but I figured it would probably be deadly. Dissolving in water, urea turns into uric acid and breaks down into ammonia, both of which eat away at the mucous membrane of the fish's gills and scales, resulting in suffocation. The fish would probably live to see the evening when she returned home, but I didn't care. I didn't want to kill her dog, but I didn't care enough to kill a fancy-colored fish. It seemed odd, especially since I had spent so much time cleaning out the tank and feeding the fish so far. I was killing fish, and it was disgusting and disgusting, But it was another small act of revenge, and another household burden lifted from my shoulders. I felt a little sorry for the fish, but I didn't feel sorry for Mandy. She would soon have other things to worry about. When Mandy got home in the evening, she hadn't eaten. It didn't help that I decided to make a very spicy beef vindaloo curry. It was one of my favorite recipes, but she couldn't stand it. That was fine with me. Plus, it gave me an excuse to drink some of that great Scottish craft beer I love so much. Over dinner, I told her about the new contract I'd managed to negotiate while she was away. I explained that I would be working up north in Yorkshire for a while, and I guess she figured it would just be another project like all the others I had worked on over the years. She was still very sad for wee Doug, and was disappointed when she found out that I was leaving for Yorkshire the next morning and wouldn't be back until late Saturday night. I didn't want to seem completely heartless, so after dinner I put my arm around her and we sat and watched TV. She was quietly crying for wee Doug, and I was quietly breathing beer and curry fumes on her. After we went to bed, I didn't fail to let out a mind-blowing fart at her that could probably be heard 2 streets away, and lingered like a decomposing badger in a township that had been ravaged by ferrets many months before. Mandy was disgusted, which was fine with me. I hadn't fed the fish for a while, and they didn't look too good when I checked them on Friday morning before leaving for Yorkshire. The peeing had put them in a bad state, and it looked like they were going to have to go to heaven soon. Mandy was still in bed, so she had no idea that tragedy was about to strike again. My trip to Yorkshire was very fruitful. The deal had already been done over the phone, and the client had all the paperwork ready to sign. I knew several of the directors, and they were absolutely delighted that I had agreed to an initial 6-month assignment with the prospect of going permanent. In addition to my fee, they agreed to pay my moving expenses, temporary accommodation in a local hotel for 2 weeks, and half the cost of renting my property in Yorkshire for the remainder of the term. Everything was ready for me to start work more or less immediately. Now all I had to do was consciously disengage myself from Mandy. My cell phone rang right after I checked into the hotel that evening. I was itching for a pint or two of locally produced Yorkshire ale, and I didn't want to waste time on the phone with Mandy. Of course, I expected to have to pay a price for killing fish. As it turned out, the price was small. Mandy had discovered the lifeless floating fish earlier in the afternoon and tried her best to gently break the news to me. She was completely unaware that she was talking personally to the fish killer. "I'm sorry to have to give you the bad news, especially after you had to get rid of wee Doug," she said. "I have no idea what happened, but there was nothing I could have done to save them." "I think you're right, Mandy," I replied. "It was too late to save them. Leave the aquarium. I'll wash it and sanitize it when I get back tomorrow." There was a very subdued atmosphere in our house that Saturday. It was only a brief stopover for me because I was back early in the morning and I was going to be traveling to Yorkshire again on Sunday. I had a list of things to do, including sorting out a pile of papers. Mandy went shopping and cooked dinner to keep me out of the way, and we spent a quiet evening in front of the Google box with a glass or two of wine, watching celebrity chatter on the TV. Neither of us was in the mood for intimacy, probably because we were both too exhausted physically and emotionally for different reasons. To my surprise, I managed to get a good night's sleep for the first time in days. When I woke up, the shock to my system seemed to have eased, and my mind had adjusted to the new reality. Feelings of alienation, insecurity, and despair were receding, replaced by a grim determination to keep going and make the best out of a bad job. I still felt sadness and emptiness within me, but I knew I was far from melancholy and gained control of my emotions by focusing on the short-term results I could well achieve. After lunch, I packed up the car, kissed my wife goodbye, and drove off to Yorkshire. Mandy must have been shocked to death when she was handed the divorce papers a couple of days later. She had no warning about it, and I suppose she thought she was just signing for some business papers. Of course, I knew when it was going to happen, and made sure my cell phone was turned off that day. I'd like to think that I wasn't being petty or cruel because I was so busy at work, but I have to admit that I liked the idea of being unconnected for those few hours. When I got back to my room after work, I turned my phone back on, read the messages, and listened to the voicemail. The gist of it was that she was frustrated, puzzled, and angry. I called her back without delay. "What the hell is going on, Terry?" she asked, getting straight to the point. "That's exactly the question I've been asking myself, Mandy," I replied. "But that was a week or so ago." "And I don't understand what you're up to, but I'd like you to stop," she said. "This is getting beyond a joke." "It's really like you're reading my script, Mandy." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Well, Mandy, at some point I wondered what you were up to," I told her. "Unfortunately, it's too late to stop it now, and it definitely wasn't just a joke." "What are you talking about, Terry?" "The Ainsley House Hotel and the Bottoms Up Club." There was a pause, followed by a long sigh. "I'm sorry, Terry," she said. "I really don't know what to say. I thought you'd never find out, and what you don't know can't hurt you." "Mandy, I have found out. I know about it, and it hurts." "Terry, we need to talk about it, but it's not something we can do over the phone." "Are you coming home on Friday?" she asked. "I'm not sure talking will help," I told her. "I'll be there on Saturday, Mandy, but I need to be back in Yorkshire by Sunday evening." Mandy looked very worried when I returned on Saturday afternoon. I didn't bother unpacking because I wasn't sure how things would work out. I had planned to stay overnight in one of the guest bedrooms, but wanted to be able to go elsewhere if things got difficult. Faced with the destruction of a home, a dwelling, family, or friends, the English usually put the kettle on and make tea. Soon Mandy had us seated in the living room with a cup of tea, and I waited patiently for her to begin her story. "First of all, I have to lay my cards on the table and say that this whole mess is my fault, Terry." I didn't answer anything. "The thing is, I gave in to temptation. I found out about the Bottoms Up Club almost by accident, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it. The first time I came, you weren't home. I was incredibly nervous, to the point where I put on a masquerade mask because I thought if I could hide my face, people wouldn't see me. I thought I could just be an observer and watch other people perform and put on a show for everyone else." I waited for her to continue. "At first it was just as I imagined," she said. "But then a lot of people started coming up to me. It wasn't long before I let myself be talked into active participation. But then I realized that these people are some of the most sincere, honest, and safe people I've ever met, and that's another reason I kept doing it." She looked at me hopefully and expectantly. "I agree, Mandy," I replied. "Having fun with other people can be fun." She smiled encouragingly at me. "As far as I'm concerned," I continued, "if you don't have an obligation to someone else, you can do whatever you want, as long as it's with consenting adults." I sat back and sipped my tea, watching her smile fade quickly, and waited to see how she would react. As far as I could tell, Mandy acted as I expected. She had a plan, and she was going to carry it out. She admitted that there was a mistake in her plan for which she was responsible, but there was no evidence of apology, no regret for the damage done, and no indication that the plan would be reversed. I knew her well enough to realize that she would be like a dog with a bone. "What I've done with other people from time to time has had no effect on my feelings for you, Terry," she said. "I love you very much, and our life together is wonderful. I just hope you can realize that having fun with other people from time to time in a safe environment is no threat to what we have together. If you're not interested, you can just ignore it. If you're not there, you don't see anything." "I think you're wrong, Mandy," I replied. "In any case, I'm afraid it's too late for me not to see anything." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I know you found out about the payments to the hotel and the club. Do you mean you saw me there?" I looked her in the eye. "If I remember correctly, around 8 o'clock on Monday night a couple weeks ago, you were being entertained by 2 young guys." "Oh my God," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. Seeing me there must have been a terrible shock to you, but believe me when I tell you that I don't love anyone else and wouldn't want to love anyone else. In retrospect, I realize I should have talked to you, but I wasn't sure I could tell you about it." "Well, you were right about that, Mandy," I said. "I wouldn't have been happy if you had told me what you were doing. Maybe it was even more exciting for you because you couldn't tell me about it." "I know you must be hurt and offended, and I can understand your point of view, Terry. I agree that I may have made an error in judgment, but filing for divorce is an extreme reaction, don't you think? I don't think it's an extreme reaction under the circumstances, I replied. You chose to betray me by giving yourself to other people. In my mind, that's unacceptable, which is why I want a divorce. Mandy's shoulders slumped and she sighed resignedly. Can we at least give some thought to what this will mean for all concerned before we go down this path? I just don't think we should give up on the status quo without thinking about the consequences. I'm already thinking through the consequences, I replied. We can take time to think about it, Mandy, but it's unlikely I'll change my mind. Next chapter. I left Mandy alone with her thoughts and went to the Fox and Hounds for a beer myself. I like pubs, but I never felt completely comfortable in the Fox and Hounds. Despite all the years we'd lived in the neighborhood, I wasn't going to miss it much. The clientele consisted mostly of pretentious middle-aged assholes, and given the choice, a pint of Yorkshire ale would beat a watery southern beer any day of the week. Sipping my flat, warm, and relatively flavorless homebrew, I pondered my next steps. By the time I got back to the road, Mandy had already started getting ready for dinner, so I went upstairs, dropped my bag off in the guest bedroom, and picked up a couple things I needed from the master bedroom. Our conversation over dinner mostly centered around what our daughters were doing. Lucy had obviously heeded Mandy's advice and was playing the field, finding a replacement for her ex-boyfriend, who was now dating Lucy's best friend, much to Lucy's annoyance. I asked Mandy what a BFF was, and she explained that it stood for best friend forever. It seemed unlikely to me that the girl in question would have that status for a long time. I had always considered Mandy my best friend. She knew that my attitude towards her was now relatively cold, but I don't think she realized how much things had changed, perhaps because I wasn't rude or impolite. She seemed to be under the impression that our conversation in the afternoon had led to some sort of ceasefire agreement. I wasn't going to dissuade her of that just yet. Sunday morning, I got up bright and early, made myself some toast and coffee, packed my bags, jumped in the wee-bug, and set off for Yorkshire. I thoroughly checked and cleared the car of everything that belonged to Mandy, including some business folders I found lying on the back seat. I had already passed Watford when my cell phone rang. "Where are you?" Mandy asked. "Did you happen to take wee-bug to the garage?" "No," I answered. "I've picked up wee-bug and I'm on my way back to Yorkshire." "I don't understand. You mean you've already left? Why did you take wee-bug away and why didn't you say goodbye?" "I decided to pick up wee-bug and you were still asleep." There was a pause while she comprehended the information she had received. "I don't understand," she finally said. "What am I supposed to do without wee-bug?" "You can use the other car, the one I usually drive." "I still don't understand why you took my car, but I know you're not yourself right now, so I'll let you go this time. I'll make do with another car for a few days. Just drive carefully and make sure you don't damage the wee-bug." By the next afternoon, I was the proud owner of a little red Mazda MX-5 convertible I spotted in the parking lot of a Yorkshire dealership. I part-exchanged the wee-bug minus the personalized registration plates. All the DVLA paperwork was done, and I put the personalized registration number up for sale on several websites. Mandy was very annoyed when she phoned me that week to find out that I had no plans to return from Yorkshire. "But how am I going to get my car back?" she asked. "You can't," I told her. "I sold it." "What do you mean you sold it?" she screamed. "It was my car." "Actually, Mandy, technically it wasn't," I replied. "I bought it, and my name was on the DVLA registration paperwork." "But that's not fair, Terry." "Maybe it is," I replied. "I suppose you could argue that I gave it to you as a gift, and it was unfair of me to take it away from you. But that's not much different from what you did to me." "Oh, come on, Terry," she said. "It's not the same thing at all. You're just being petty, but I understand what you're trying to get across to me. If you'd stop this nonsense and just come home, we could talk things out reasonably, settle things, and move on with our lives." "Leave it to me, Mandy," I said, "and I'll come back to you." For the whole of the next week, Mandy called me every day, asking me to come back to Surrey to talk to me and try to sort things out. The conversation was always the same, until she found out that I had sold my stake in the ABC. "How could you make that decision alone?" she pestered me. Why didn't you talk to me about your thoughts? I'm the second shareholder in our company, so you should ask me before you just take off and do something crazy like this. Those are reasonable questions, I replied calmly. I know you're ABC's second shareholder, and I realize that my actions will seriously affect you. Believe me, Mandy, I completely understand that you are angry and upset that I made the decision unilaterally without consulting you. I am absolutely certain that you would not have approved of my intentions, but I did not need to ask you about selling my ABC shares. I know how you feel because I felt the same way when I found out about your decision to have fun with other people. I'm sorry you're upset, but whatever your feelings are, the decision can't be undone. You'll just have to accept what happened and adjust to whatever changes come as a result. You bastard, Terry, she growled. The next time she called, a few days later, she was screaming and yelling at me, blazing with rage. So much so that it was hard to understand exactly what she was saying. When we started the company, we each had the same number of shares. What she didn't realize was that I had inherited my father's shares, and that increased my stake to 51%. It came as a nasty surprise when ABC's new majority owners froze the company's bank accounts and sent her an invitation to an extraordinary general meeting to consider proposals to replace the board and complete the takeover. Mandy was telling me angrily that she now had no access to ABC's cash reserves. Don't you understand, Terry? ABC had over $200,000 in the bank. Because of what you've done, we no longer have control of those funds. I don't know what to do. Now we won't be able to get that money for retirement. I'm sorry you have such bad news, I managed to say when she paused. But at least you still have a job. I mean, you probably still have a job. A sharp sigh sounded. Oh my God. She gasped, realizing what I had said. There was silence for a moment, and then I heard the unmistakable sounds of mournful sobs, after which she walked away. I think Mandy eventually guessed that the deal I'd made with Jim Savage took ABC's finances and other resources into account. What she didn't know was that in exchange for 51% of the stock, I got twice the average annual turnover for the last 5 fiscal years, plus the equivalent of cash reserves. The other part of the deal was that Jim was offering to retain Mandy as a principal consultant for at least 2 more years with a set annual salary and additional performance-based payments. Jim wasn't the kind of person who liked to chat. He knew that keeping her as the face of ABC would be good business. Next chapter. During the divorce proceedings, our house was sold. Buying and selling houses in England is a tricky business. Offers are often contingent on other chain deals, where a bidder relies on someone else buying their property before they can buy yours. Not only that, the best offers can be outbid at the last minute by someone offering more money after the official closing date. That's exactly what happened with our house. The best offer at the closing date was contingent on other transactions in the chain that would have eventually gotten us the money. However, the day after the closing date, the real estate agent received a slightly better offer with no chain and no other encumbrances. I was very pleased when we decided to accept the unconditional offer, and I think Mandy was relieved when the deal was finalized. By now, she had fully accepted that we were going our separate ways. The deed transferring ownership of the house stated that Max Payne Associates was the new owners. I made sure that the identity of the person behind Max Payne Associates was not revealed. I considered it a good investment. The house was in a great location and could easily be rented out to create an additional source of income for a change management consultant living and working in Yorkshire. I hadn't spoken to Mandy for quite some time, but she rang me recently to ask if I had come across her wedding dress. Our daughter, Linda, and her boyfriend are on the cusp of getting married, and it seems Mandy was keen for Linda to wear her wedding dress on the big day. Mandy thought that perhaps it had been mistakenly packed and put with my things when we parted. I'm sorry, Mandy, I said. I have no idea where your wedding dress might be. I always try to tell the truth. I have no idea where the dress might be now, because I took it and sold it to a nice lady in Yorkshire who has an almost new store. There is no way I would let my wife keep that wedding dress. Apart from breaking her vows, I was sure my daughters would not be able to wear it if or when I escorted any of them down the aisle. Lucy called me a few days later. "Mommy's freaking out, Daddy," she exclaimed in drama queen mode. "She just found out that the diamond and eternity ring you gave her a few years ago is cheap costume jewelry. It's more or less worthless." "Oh dear, that's a shame," I replied. "She must have thought it very valuable and must be very disappointed and unhappy. I guess she never would have known the truth if she hadn't checked it out. That's the way it is in life sometimes. People put a value on things and then feel terribly disappointed if the value of something turns out to be much less than they thought it was." Sure enough, the original ring is safely locked away in a safe deposit box at my bank. Who knows? It might come in handy if I find someone special. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.